So what had happened was where things literally froze up in a matter of like days. Basically, there was a big storm of 120-kilometer winds, like I said, like hurricane force winds. I was stranded on a peninsula for a week, 7 days. I couldn't go nowhere because the lake was massive and there was ocean-like waves. So after that, it just stayed cold. It was like every day after that it was cold, cold, cold. It never warmed up after. And then we had a big storm, and things froze over so quick that my pilot couldn't come in with his float plane anymore and get me.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Paul Schmid, the host of The Pursuit Zone, a podcast that interviews explorers from around the globe to bring you their exciting stories. These are people that dream big, break out of their comfort zones, and take on ambitious pursuits. This is episode 182 with Justin Barbour. In this episode, we talk about his hiking and canoeing adventures across Newfoundland and the Labrador Peninsula, and also about his YouTube channel, which is named Justin Barbour. And Barbour is spelled Barbour. So let's start the show, and let me introduce my guest. With his dog Saku, he explores the Canadian province of Newfoundland and Labrador. In 2017, they crossed Newfoundland 700 kilometers by foot, snowshoe, and pack raft. In 2018, with the support from the Royal Canadian Geographical Society and Mountain Equipment Co-op, they began a crossing over the Labrador Peninsula on foot and by canoe. It was a 1,700-kilometer dream project and a way to share some of these last undeveloped wilderness areas. In the end, their goal of reaching the shores of Hudson Bay fell short by 700 kilometers as high winds pinned them down for 28 days. You can learn more about these journeys at newfoundlandexplorer.com. Justin Barbour, welcome to the Pursuit Zone.
Good morning, Paul. Thanks for having me here. I'm excited.
Justin, where did you grow up?
I grew up in a small community on the eastern coast of Newfoundland called Barbour. So a real small community, probably only 400 or 500 people. But later in life, in my teens, I moved to St. John's, which is the capital city of Newfoundland and Labrador. So it's a bigger city with around 250,000 people. But I grew up in a rural community with lots of outdoors surrounding me, so it was good.
And what do you do for a day job or to earn a living?
I'm doing a bit of everything at the moment now. I guess I've been I guess we can call it freelancing. I'm a teacher by degree. I'm trained to teach K-12 physical education and science. And I have taught for about 4 years. I've been teaching now. I've had 1 year replacements. I've taught 2 and 3 month replacements, replacing teachers who were sick or were pregnant and stuff like that. I've been kind of weaning my way out of it. Not that I don't enjoy it. I just enjoy the outdoor lifestyle and documenting my trips and telling the story and trying to inspire other people to get out. So with that, I've been basically working on my YouTube channel, which is growing pretty quickly at over 20,000 subscribers. I have a couple books coming out on some of my expeditions. And I do a lot of public speaking and stuff like that. So I'm doing a bit of everything right now at the moment, but it's paying the bills. But I'm certainly not a full-time teacher at the moment.
What was it that got you started or sparked your interest in the outdoors?
I've always been interested in the outdoors, Paul. Growing up in that small community of Balleen until my early teens, other than playing hockey, which was another passion of mine, I spent a lot of my time outdoors, building cabins and lean-tos and, all these kinds of forts and playing all kinds of games with, my friends, Spotlight and all these types of games and doing some fishing and setting snares. And, I was always on adventures outdoors growing up. My parents gave me a lot of, they always kept a watchful eye, but they gave me a bit of freedom to go out and explore, around my backyard, around my house and the neighborhood and stuff. So I've always been interested in it, but as I said, hockey was a big passion of mine too, and there came a point, in my early teens where hockey kind of took over, and I just put all my time into that. I had a dream, like a lot of other hockey players, to try to make the NHL. And I did what I could, and I played some junior hockey in New Brunswick, and all during this time, I never spent much time outdoors. From the age of 12 or 13 to until I came home and finished playing junior at the age of 21. And it was at that point in time that I took a physical education course to become a physical education teacher, and we were required to spend 2 nights on a canoe trip to learn how to canoe and learn some basic camping skills outside the main city. And we went out on a trip with our class, and after those 2 nights, I wanted to buy a canoe. I kind of rekindled that passion for the outdoors that I had when I was younger and that I was kind of drifting away from. And then ever since then, I got into reading about other people on adventures, and I stumbled upon a couple of documentaries on YouTube and read a few books on early explorers in our province and other places in the world. And it's kind of been a snowball effect leading to me trying my own trips, where I've started at one night or even half a day, and I've worked myself up to, last year I was 83 days. So that's kind of been, how it's turned into this, I suppose, the easiest way to explain it, if that makes any sense.
People that aren't familiar with Canada and the provinces, what should we know about Newfoundland and Labrador?
The first thing you should know about Newfoundland and Labrador is that we're unique in the way that our province is split up. Part of the province is Newfoundland, which is the island portion, the easternly-most province in Canada, and we're kind of just out here in the Atlantic Ocean to the east of Nova Scotia, whereas Labrador is connected to mainland Canada next to Quebec. Yeah, so we're split up in that regard, but we are one. In that one, there's a lot of outdoors. We have a very small population density here in Newfoundland. It's something like 1.4 people per square kilometer, something like 420,000 square kilometers of land. Yeah, there's not many people and a lot of places to go outdoors and take part in whatever outdoor activities you might want to take part in, In some places, especially in the interior of Newfoundland and up in Labrador, you can go hundreds of kilometers and not even hit a community. It's just complete wilderness, and most of it being unspoiled and untouched by the hand of man, other than some hydro projects and stuff. But most of it is it is pristine, right? A lot of it is untouched. We have friendly people. We're very hospitable people. When visitors come into Newfoundland, they have a great experience because we're easy to get along with and we're welcoming. So there's a lot to like about this province. I love, spreading the good word whenever I can.
You're doing these adventures with your dog, Saku. Tell me about your dog. What breed?
Saku is he's a Cape Shore water dog. Not a common name. It's sort of a land race, a combination between like a retriever and a working dog that's been bred here on the south coast of Newfoundland over the last 100-odd years. Most people use these dogs for retrieving sea ducks in the Atlantic Ocean. So not even in the freshwater, in the ocean, in rough seas, in cold waters, and in months like January and February when the temperatures could be minus 15, minus 20 or colder. And these dogs are kind of bred to be retrieving these seabirds. So they're a hardy breed. I found out about this dog, it's kind of a mix between like a Chesapeake retriever, a black lab, an Irish setter, and Portuguese water dog. So there's a bit of everything mixed in there, and that's kind of how this dog originated. They say that the Portuguese back in the early 1800s brought over this water dog and some Basque sailors as well, and they left them here on the south coast of Newfoundland. So nonetheless, a hardy breed, and I noticed that, and when I was looking for a dog for my adventures, I stumbled upon an ad online for the breeders selling a dog, and he's a very high energy dog, can swim like a fish, and again, a tough breed. And he's 3 years old now, so he's becoming well experienced as well.
Yeah, if you didn't know any better, you would think it's probably a black lab.
Yeah, you would. And you look at his face and he has that lab face, but once people see him in person, and even in some of my YouTube videos and stuff, you can tell that he's very curly from the neck right back to his tip of his tail. So unlike a normal black lab, which is usually straight haired. Saku is very curly, and he's high on his back legs. You need a keen eye to tell the differences, but if you stood him up next to a black lab, you could certainly tell that they're not the same, right? But lots of similarities. Has the webbed feet, has the fur, the oil coating where they can just kind of flick water off their fur real quick. They dry quick. And he can retrieve well. He's after retrieving numerous ducks, and I hardly trained him to retrieve any ducks on some of our trips. It was just instinct in him. I remember when I shot my first duck that he just went out and got it, and I hardly had to tell him what to do, because it's just in him, Very good dog for any outdoorsman, for sure.
Well, back in 2017, you two did the 700 kilometers across Newfoundland and west to east. How did you come up with the idea for that?
As I said, I kind of worked my way into this stuff, like, half a day, 3 days. After 3 days, it's kind of, I just want to keep pushing it, and I used to take people out with me for a day or two, and then I just wanted to go a little further and a little harder, and that's when people started falling off, and I just kind of kept doing it on my own, hence why I got Saku. Just before Saku, around a year before, I'd done a trip for 14 days. And it was a 14-day trip, 120 kilometers, solo on my own, half canoeing, half hiking. It was just kind of for me to see if this was something I'd like to do, like a longer type trip. And I got back from that, and I was like, wow, that was an amazing experience, the challenges and getting through them, and the feeling that you get when you do get through them, it's indescribable, the freedom, all the natural experiences, fishing and stuff. So I enjoyed it, and I got back, and I wanted to up the ante, and I thought of some bigger trips within Newfoundland, and I had Google Maps up, making routes from here to there and there to there. And at the time, I was reading some old books from the early 1900s on some traditional indigenous groups here in Newfoundland, and talking about them going into the country and trapping and hunting. And I got interested in some of the areas, so I noticed that if I could cross Newfoundland, I'd kind of hit some of these areas and go through some of the same places that some of these early European explorers and the early indigenous people had gone through. Yeah, I was only going to do half the province, and I said if I'm only going to do half, 350 odd kilometers, I might as well do the whole thing. Go big or go home. And so that was that. About 2 years before the trip, I was teaching in Labrador actually for a full year on a replacement, and I said, in about 2 years' time, I'm going to try to cross Newfoundland by my own power, and that's kind of how it began.
And how much time did you have to put into planning the route?
Just about 2 years of planning the route, figuring out what was going to be the easiest way with regards to like sticking to the waterways. In Newfoundland, a lot of the waterways run north to south. Kind of made going from west to east and sticking on rivers kind of improbable. So that's where I came up with the idea to get a pack raft. And I don't know if that's a question you have later, but a pack raft is an inflatable boat. It's made by alpaca pack rafts, and it was 6 pounds. I got one of those, and that could allow me to travel, through the mountains when I needed to and across the lakes when I had to. So, what
kind of paddle do you use with that pack raft?
I have it's like a kayak style paddle. It's made by Aquabound, and it's like a 210 centimeter paddle, and it collapses down into 4 pieces. So very easy to pack away. And as I said, the raft is 6 pounds. The paddle's like, maybe 1.5. I don't know. It's not too heavy. But all in all, with the raft, the spray deck that comes on it, the paddle, and a patch kit, it all weighs around close on 11 pounds. Not bad, considering a canoe, like the lightest canoe you'd get for something like this would probably only be like 30, 35 pounds, So certainly a good way to save weight and keep on the water. I like paddling. I didn't want to walk and bushwhack the entire way. I wanted to mix in some paddling, so the raft was a good way to go.
What are you doing for food, and how are you planning your food resupplies?
So that was a big learning curve for me on the Newfoundland trip, because I had some sections where, I was going one particular section, I was going 240 kilometers on my same ration of food, whereas before I had only gone, the furthest I had gone was 120. So I was doubling the distance, and the 120 kilometer trip was the first one I had done, which kind of got me fired up for these bigger trips. But to double that for 240 kilometers and have to carry all the food became a bit of a challenge. So, So basically I just started looking at diet and trying to carry, of course, try to balance it between the fats, proteins, and carbs, but trying to keep, everything pretty calorie dense, trying to take a little more fats because there's more calories per gram in the fats and stuff like that. I had around 3,000 calories per day with me on this trip. I was burning a hell of a lot more than that, but again, you can only carry so much, especially when most of the time it was on my back. But I did a lot, some calories for fish. I wasn't planning to live off the land 100% because to cover that amount of distance and hunt and fish the entire way as one person is extremely difficult, and maybe something I'd like to try down the road, but it wasn't this early on. So I certainly plan to get some fish when the season opened up, in a few weeks into the trip, and I done that, and that was a big help as well. I think we ate something like between us, me and Saku, like 63 fish, trout. Diet is tricky, and I did the best I could to take in a balanced diet, and Saku had his own food, which he also carried in his own pack. He had like a saddle type pack. We were both fueled up, and I had a few resupplies along the way. I had 3 resupplies on this 700-kilometer distance. So at that point, we got, fresh food and maybe a little bit of clothing, but mostly it was just food and probably some batteries and stuff like that,
How are you navigating, and how do you find the spots where you place the food?
Well, all the food supplies were actually at junctions where my route met remote roads or communities. So 2 of my resupplies I gave to people before the trip started, people I had contacted. One was a hunting outfitter, and he had a small camp on a remote woods road that I crossed over. Sorry, it wasn't a woods road. It was a remote highway, and I crossed over this middle at his camp. Was waiting for me was my resupply, and then my second one was given to the chief of a Mi'kmaq Aboriginal reserve here in Newfoundland, the only reserve we actually have. So I had given my stuff to him before the trip. Once I landed in that community, I spent a bit of time learning about some of their traditions and whatnot. And my final resupply was actually given to my girlfriend. And at that point in time, it had been a while since I seen her, we had a little hiatus from each other. So when I got close towards the end of the trip, I was around 200 kilometers away from the finish. And she came and met me on another highway and gave me my last resupply. So that was all 3. There was a bit of work to planning those out as well. And I didn't really want to leave them in the middle of nowhere because if I left a thing of food under a bunch of bush somewhere, a bear could have got into it, and then I would have got there and my food would have been gone. So I had left with these 2 people, and with my fiance now, Heather. We just got engaged, so I had all of my stuff left with these individuals, and by using my map and stuff, having the points marked out, I knew exactly where to go. And with regards to navigation, it's I have a compass, a map and compass, and I also carry a GPS. So those things help me find my route and find my resupplies.
Congratulations on the engagement.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks. Yeah, just happened there a few weeks ago, actually. So sometimes I forget to say it,
How does Saku handle that backpack?
Saku does well with it. He loves it, actually. He gets excited. He likes to contribute. And I put the pack on him, and his tail perks up and he's ready to go. Right, he has a job now, and he helps out. So he likes that, and it's something like I just didn't. For example, on the Newfoundland trip, I think he carried at one point about 13 or 14 pounds. But I had eased him up to that. I just didn't go throw that on his back right away. I started with 1 pound, months before we left on the trip, and then I eased up to 2 pounds, and then a few days later I did 3 and 4 and 5, and I worked my way up until he felt comfortable. He has no trouble lugging that around. Yeah, only gives him a job, and a way to chip in, and helps me out too, right?
Right. Well, what are you carrying on your back? I think you said was your pack raft system was like 11 pounds, and then what else do you have? What's your total weight that you're carrying?
It varies quite a bit throughout the trip, At times it maxed out on about 85 pounds. Plus I carried a shotgun in my hand for protection against bears and wolves and coyotes. And in other times in the trip, it was down to 60, 65 pounds later on, you know. Other than my raft, of course, my food. And on this trip, at times, when Saku was a younger dog, when we left, he was only 8 months old. I carried some of his food, actually, as well to start the trip. I carried a few days of his food, because each day of his food was about a pound, you know. I carried some of that, and then I had my own food as well, and I had, you know, like my tent, you know, my sleeping bag, some clothing, an axe, and a small saw. My tech gear, like I had a GoPro, and I had a DSLR camera and batteries and like external microphone, and you know, my GPS. I had a satellite phone, so my tech gear weighed in at around 15 pounds alone, which was a challenge, you know, trying to document the trip like I'd done, but it was well worth it. No regrets there. Maybe in another 50 years when my back is gone, but that's it. It's well worth it. So yeah, that was the bulk of my stuff. You know, first aid. I carried first aid stuff for both me and Saku as well. That was roughly the weight. And with Saku, with dogs can handle around maximum 20 to 25% of their body weight. I was going a little less than that starting off on this trip for Saku because he was a younger dog. But I was on a trip recently, a few weeks ago, and he carried 19 pounds. So that was the most he had ever carried. And he carried that because, you know, right now, Saku is like 75 pounds, you know, so it's certainly 20 pounds is around a quarter of his body weight, and he's used to it, right? So just like I became hardened over this trip and got used to carrying a lot of weight too.
For your shotgun, are you able to do any like bird hunting with that and eat that, or is it's strictly for protection?
Yeah, it was strictly for protection, or like if I did get into a pickle and I did have to hunt for food because the hunting season was closed on this trip. So unless I was in like life or death, you know, I mean, I'm sure I would be excused in that situation. So it was nice to have it there for that, but also for the protection. So that was something else. I carried a bit of ammo, not much. I mean, something like 8. I had 8 shotgun shells, like, you know, from a couple slugs for more of a protection side of things. And then I had some lighter stuff to make a bang, to scare off a bear, you know, if I didn't need to shoot it, which I never would want to do. I mean, but, you know, when your life's on the line, you're never sure what you're going to have to do. You know, but bull moose are just probably more dangerous than bears here in Newfoundland. You come into a bull moose, especially in the rutting season in the fall, and, you know, they can be just as dangerous. So, yeah, I had the gun for that. But I was in Labrador last year, and we'll talk about that trip in a bit, I guess. But I was allowed to hunt up there later in the trip, so I did get some ducks and geese. But the ammo certainly made up a bit more of my weight as well. There's lots of things you can take, right? And I'm always minimizing my pack, even since then. I mean, I kind of look at my gear list from then, and I laugh at it because I've really cut down weight since in the 2.5 years, or 2 years, or however long it's been, you know.
What did you see out there for animals?
Pretty much everything I could see here in the province, you know. I've seen about 115 woodland caribou. One group was a herd of around 23 or 24, which me and Saku watched from around 30 yards away, and they acted like they'd never seen us because they probably hadn't seen humans before, you know, a human or a dog. Moose, a lot of geese and ducks, the black bears. I've seen 4 black bear, beavers, otters, mink. The only animals I didn't really see, we have lynx here in Newfoundland and Labrador, which are like, you know, the cat. And I didn't see any coyotes or wolves either, although I did hear them howling at nighttime on a few occasions. The coyotes and wolves, much like the lynx, are more kind of nocturnal, and so that's why they're a little more difficult to see. The lynx being more nocturnal than the coyotes and wolves, but that was pretty much it, you know. Of course, we caught lots of fish, and that was the bulk of the wildlife that we've seen. There's lots up here. There's lots of, you know, for anyone interested in hunting and fishing opportunities, there's lots here in our province, you know.
What did you find to be the most challenging part of that trek across Newfoundland?
Physically or mentally, what you just mean in general, hey?
However you'd like to answer it.
I certainly had some physical challenges, and there were some ones that were not so hard physically, but more, you know, mentally draining, I guess. I think one of the most difficult scenarios I had myself in was on this trip. I had left in April, so I had planned to leave later in May, and that way I would have bypassed any snow whatsoever. But I had an important wedding commitment, of course. Weddings, they're always popping up, but I had one pop up in that summer, early in the summer, in early July, after I had planned this trip. So I kind of needed to be there for it, but I also needed to do this trip for myself. So I pushed the trip ahead a month, leaving in April. And at the start of the trip, I went through a mountain range where the snow was hard and crisp, and I pulled a sled over the mountains for 100 kilometers. But eventually, after that 100 kilometers, when conditions started to warm up and I got back out of the mountain, down out of the mountains, I started dealing with, for about a week, soft snow that even with snowshoes on, I was sinking up to my waist. And I battled through that for several days. And I'd be pulling my sled over sections of snow on a big marshy area. And then all of a sudden the snow will be gone. And I'd be pulling my sled over just marshland with no snow whatsoever, because I didn't really want to get rid of my sled because I thought I might use it again and I thought I might need it. So I got into a bit of a, I kind of wanted to get rid of the sled because I wasn't using it all the time, but there was situations where I thought I still might need it, so I kept it. So it was a bit of a battle there for about a week getting through that spring melt. But once we got through it, we were on to the next challenge kind of thing. But that was certainly one of the biggest ones. We also we flipped our raft over too. Hey, I had a capsize in some rapids, and I lost a bunch of gear. I couldn't find Saku for a little while either. But
when you're in your pack raft, are you going across lakes or are you going across rivers?
Whatever's in front of us. I crossed lakes. I crossed the second biggest lake in Newfoundland, a portion of it, and I went down rivers and small little ponds too, the size of your backyard. Whatever, came in our path, and I thought the raft would be the best mode, Sometimes I got to a small pond and I walked around it because I felt it would be quicker than inflating the raft. And then other times on bigger lakes and ponds, I used it, or in this case on a river. And we had that incident there, but we made it out alive, of course, because I'm here now, but it was the scariest thing that's ever happened to me and still is to this day. If people want to go in and watch the series and yourself, you can see more on it then. I don't want to spoil too much, but
sure.
I also have a book coming out as well, but we can talk about that later.
Now you had the second trip, this 1,000 kilometers across the Labrador Peninsula in 83 days, and this was the summer of 2018. The expedition that we just talked about, the one in Newfoundland, that gave you a lot of experience. You learned a lot. You were able to shave some weight off your pack and come into this Labrador trip with a lot more experience. The Labrador trip, how did that whole idea come about?
It was just kind of like a natural progression, I suppose, Paul. A very small percentage of it had to do with me teaching for a year in Labrador, as I mentioned earlier there. That just got me dreaming of the trips I could make up there. In the wilderness in Newfoundland is pretty impressive and extreme, but up in Labrador, it's taken to the next level. The furthest you can probably go in Newfoundland without hitting the communities, maybe 100 kilometers. Up in Labrador, you can go like 500-600 kilometers, and there's nothing. Very vast, it is one of the last true wilderness areas left in the planet, that Labrador Peninsula and northern Quebec area. So I thought it was a natural progression if I went across Newfoundland to challenge myself in the other part of our province and see what was up there and bring recognition to that side of our province too. So I went ahead and said, Saku, do you want to go again? And I said, this time we're going to Labrador. And of course, I couldn't find anyone foolish enough to come with me on that one either. So off we went last summer, just the two of us. We left on July 27th.
Tell me about your canoe.
My canoe? You tell me about yours.
Don't have one.
Kidding. I had a canoe for this one now because at one point in time, I went almost 500 kilometers. I think it was, I can't remember correctly, but 500 kilometers without any resupply. I would not be able to do that in the raft. I wouldn't be able to carry that much food for me in Saku. The raft would have been sunk like a rock. So I needed a canoe, and I reached out to some different companies, and Skiff is a Quebec company, makes canoes, very durable canoe. I purchased a 15-foot Prospector model off them and made a couple modifications. Saku didn't need a seat in the front of the canoe in the bow, so I removed that seat to shave off like 3.5 pounds. And I just put like a little stick of wood in there to replace it so the canoe wouldn't lose its structure. But yeah, so I went ahead with that canoe. It was 56 pounds.
Fiberglass?
It's called T-Formex. Have you ever heard of Roylex?
Yes.
So Roylex is it was kind of the nearly indestructible material they used to make canoes for a long time. They weren't always the lightest canoes, but they were certainly canoes better built for these demanding expeditions where canoes take a beating. But what happened, from my knowledge, is that the company in the States, in the U.S., in the southern U.S., who were making this Roylex material, I think it might have been in California somewhere. Anyhow, whatever happened, they shut down and they stopped making Roylex. So, I mean, of course, a lot of canoe dealers had some Roylex in stock that they used to make their own canoes that must have been left over. But once that ran out, people didn't really have a replacement. And, there is fiberglass and whatnot and other light materials. There's foldable canoes that you can get these days, but a lot of them are not kind of built to take the abuse that's in store when you're going and dragging a canoe up the river like I would have been doing over rocks with 300 or 400 pounds in the canoe. So a skiff, they came up with their own material called T-Formex, which is similar to Roylex. It's just as strong, but they found a way by sandwiching in some type of metal, and I'm not 100% sure of all the material names now, but it's just as strong as Roylex, but it's actually lighter than Roylex. So they have pretty much a moderately lightweight canoe that can take a beating. I certainly tested it on my trip, and it held up right till the end.
And what were you using for a paddle?
I fell so in love with the kayak-style paddle in my alpaca that I got a longer one at 250 centimeters for my canoe. So I paddled my canoe almost like a kayak, primarily because being a solo paddler, if I'm paddling a day in and day out, you always have to correct your stroke. If I kept paddling on one side of the canoe would just go in the opposite direction. You got to be alternating your stroke. It's called a correction stroke, and that keeps the canoe straight. So anyone who canoes would know what I'm talking about. But with a kayak style paddle, you don't have to correct your stroke, and correcting your stroke takes extra energy. It's strain on your shoulder. Instead, with a kayak paddle, you can just paddle straight ahead and the canoe goes straight. If you got to have an extra couple paddles on one side or the other, well, you do it. But ultimately, you just have to paddle straight forward, and you don't have to do any correction strokes like you would have to do if I just had a single wooden paddle. So I went with the kayak style, and I used that 90% of the time. My other paddle was a traditional wooden canoe paddle, and I used that on some of the rivers and some of the shallow sections. If I wanted to, pry the canoe off the rocks, I didn't mind beating it up. So that's kind of what I went with paddles.
Did you start out in the canoe on day one, or did you have to hike in to put in some water somewhere?
Oh, no. Started in the canoe on day one and finished in the canoe. To start the trip, I had a 70-kilometer paddle up Grand Lake, which is on the eastern coast of Labrador, of course, near the community of Northwest River. So we paddled around 70 kilometers up that until we got to the first river that we had to ascend. That's
the Red Wine River?
The Red Wine River, yeah. Well, there was one river we had to ascend to get to the red wine called the Nazca River. So we ascended that one around 25 kilometers. That was a wide river at this point, very lazy flow. So it wasn't too much of a challenge. There was certainly some friction coming against us, but I never had to get out and drag or line the canoe, which I would have to do on the red wine. I basically just paddled up the entire Nazca, 25 kilometers, and then we came to the Red Wine River.
Justin, if you don't mind, I pulled a paragraph out of your blog. I wanted to read it. I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit. We saw the land in a way the earliest explorers would have, especially ascending the Red Wine River system in Labrador. This very difficult and dangerous section branched off the Nazca River and climbed 2,000 feet in about 200 kilometers. It was the longest phase of seeing absolutely zero signs of prior civilization. No camps, tree cuttings, blazes, portage trails, fire pits, Vienna sausage cans, nothing. That was true untouched wilderness and by far the most rewarding stint of the journey. Yeah, I love that quote.
Oh, and as I explained earlier, like Labrador is the real deal. And if you want to do a trip like that, you can have an experience where, you can go a long time and see nothing. And for that section where it took so long for me to climb the river, I mean, it was basically rapid after rapid after rapid. There was very few sections of the river where it was flat and calm, So I averaged around 8 kilometers a day pulling up the river. So I spent a lot of time in that section, and I didn't see nothing, not a thing, not a sign of any prior human contact on the land. I know of one group that had paddled down a portion of the Great Whale River or the Red Wine River, and certainly some of the old trappers in the area had been around it in the winter on Skidoo, checking some traps. But people who I talked to in the community could tell me nothing about the river because it wasn't a commonly used route by the early explorers and indigenous people, the Innu. The Innu would always travel up the Nascapi to get to Smallwood, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a bit, Smallwood Reservoir. But the Red Wine River was, it was untouched. In the upper reaches of the river, where it branched, I could find zero information on anyone who had ever paddled up or down it in these upper reaches. So I could only imagine there was many spots where I was the first person to set a campsite there or to set up a tent, So to me, it felt like true exploration. I don't want to say ever that I was the first person ever to go through these areas because we don't know what happened 500 years ago with some of the earliest indigenous groups, but there certainly was no sign of anything. It was the first time I ever had an experience like that in my life for that long. And it was definitely the most rewarding to battle through it and to have that feeling of being in a place that was completely untouched, and that just intensifies the feeling of freedom, that the human spirit kind of needs, and we don't get enough of.
So at 8 kilometers an hour, 8 kilometers per day, over 200 kilometers, it would have taken you about 25 days or so. And then after that, is that where you get to the Smallwood?
I had a few days off because it was pretty demanding coming up the river. So it was 27 days by the time I got to Smallwood. And at that point in time, I got my first resupply of rations of food. Then I went and crossed Smallwood, which is the biggest lake in our province and the 10th biggest in Canada. So very massive. It's a reservoir, so they're tapping into the water for the Churchill Falls Hydro Project, which ran about 100 kilometers south of our route, a little bit further. But it's still no sign of anything, no cabins, no houses. It's not like it's still very remote. And we had around 220 kilometers to cross Smallwood. Yeah, that was after climbing the Red Wine. So we left from there with a pretty heavy canoe and went onward.
Now, you're battling a lot of wind on this trip, so you're losing time. I think you said you had 28 windbound days that really slowed you down, but also you have an early winter now that's coming in. So it slows you're not able to get to the Great Whale River. So at what point do you begin to think about, I may not make it and I may have to call it quits? When does that start coming into your mind?
Never. I was never thinking, until the last few days, I was never thinking, I knew it was a race against winter, I knew that from the beginning. I left a bit late, again, because of commitments in the early summer, but I had the idea, I just wanted to make the trip happen. And I kind of knew it was a race against winter the entire time. My projected time to get to Smallwood up the Red Wine was 25 days. I done it in 27. Only because I had a delay waiting for my resupply. If I didn't have a delay, I would have done it in 25. So it was right on schedule. But getting on Smallwood, the winds, the northwest prevailing wind there started to eat me up. And again, that was one of the challenges going into the trip. I knew there was going to be a lot of wind that time of year, but I just wanted to try it out and see what happened. I had allotted for 14 days off because of wind. And by the end of the trip, we had 28 days, so double the amount of time. And sorry, I mean 14 days I had allotted for just days off due to weather, rest, etc. And it ended up being double that because of the wind. So when I got across Smallwood, I was still in good spirits, and though I was a bit behind schedule then, I still thought I could do it. But it was a combo of the wind, and then of course, as I progressed my way and continued to make good time after getting off some of the bigger waterways, and I started climbing the McFadden River up to the Quebec border, and I was again making good time then. But winter comes quick up in the north up there, and it actually came. Based on what my pilot had told me, my pilot who was resupplying me after the trip, he told me it was the earliest winter he can remember in around 25 years, where he usually takes his float plane out of the water behind his house. That froze up a month early, so it froze. So everything was winter came early, and the wind had dragged me down. So it got to the point in the week before I had to get flown out of there. Then I started thinking, okay, a snowstorm came at that time, about a week before I got pulled out. A snowstorm, I'm talking October 9th, we had like 35 centimeters of snow. And after that, it just stayed cold. There was a day with 120 kilometer winds, and wind chills were like minus 26. So I knew then that winter was coming on in a hurry, and quicker than I could have expected, quicker than any of the weather charts I had checked. And it was only then that I realized that I was probably going to have to quit early, you know what I mean, and get out of there for safety and everything else. And I mean, a canoe can't paddle on ice. And when I got flown out of there was an inch of ice on most of the waterways, the ponds and lakes in the area. Of course, some of the rivers weren't froze over, but all the lakes were starting to freeze over, and I had to leave. But I certainly wasn't thinking quit until that last week, because that's me. I always believe there's a way, and we'll get there. But I did know we were racing old man winter for sure.
How'd Saku do on the adventure?
Saku did great. Saku did. In fact, Saku had, for him, it was also a good challenge going up the Red Wine River, except for one portage when he did carry his pack. Every other part of that climbing the Red Wine River, he never ever wore his bag once. I carried all of his food on portages, or it was always in the canoe as we were pulling up river. So he was weightless, and he was just hopping rocks and stuff, and he did well there. Like, he was always well ahead of me, making me seem like I was slow, more or less. There was flies and stuff, and he got bothered by them a bit, just like I was. But I mean, that's just a sacrifice you make, and there was no harm done. Once we got to Smallwood, the worst was over for Saku, to be honest with you. He did a bit of walking up river on the McFadden, coming to Quebec, but from Smallwood to the McFadden River, he spent around 3 weeks just sitting in the canoe all day, just lying down in the canoe. And to the point where I had him on, for the Newfoundland trip, I was starting off, I was on a budget, I didn't have many sponsors, so I just had normal dog kibble for him, just the same stuff we use around the house. But for this trip in Labrador, I got sponsored by Inukshuk Professional Dog Food at Fredericton, New Brunswick. They supply high-energy food for mushers, for dog teams, for other sporting dog owners. And I got my hands on some of that for Saku. So kind of like what I do with my food, it was high-density calorie food. So for very little weight, it had the most possible calories. High-energy food, and Saku was eating all this food the whole trip. But in that 3 weeks or so, from Smallwood over to the McFadden, when he was lying in the canoe, he actually started putting weight on. And he was starting to get a little fat because he was eating this high-calorie food, but he wasn't doing nothing. He was just sitting like a king in the canoe. So I actually had to start cutting back his food because they told me, like, don't feed him this stuff around the house on an everyday basis unless he's getting like a few hours of exercise, because it's hard on his organs and his liver and stuff. It's very high fat food. So Saku started getting a bit thick in the canoe, It was kind of funny because I was just withering away to nothing, and Saku, who had lost a few pounds on the red wine, all of a sudden was starting to put weight back on. The trip was different for him. He had some sections where he was on his feet and moving, going up some of the rivers, but then a lot of the paddling, he was just kicked back and living the dream,
Yeah, you lost 26 pounds, I have in my notes.
Yeah, I did. I lost a fair bit of weight, you know. Most of that was lost in the last 3 to 4 weeks. I lost a bit beforehand. I mean, I was losing it on a daily basis. I mean, I'm always in the red. Impossible to eat as many calories as what I'm burning, you know. Some days burning 4,500 calories, you know, roughly. I mean, I'm not getting that much into me. In the last 3 weeks, temperatures went above 0 degrees Celsius only twice. So every other day it was in the minuses. That cold weather, especially at nighttime, when my sleeping bag was on the fringe of being warm enough, because again, I didn't expect it to get so cold so quick. So I had a bit of a sleeping bag that was a bit more suited for a little bit warmer weather. But I had what I had, and at nighttime especially, I had some cold nights, and my body was trying to keep warm, and of course it didn't have enough calories, so it was just eating away at my fats, and I lost weight pretty quick there towards the end. So
you ended up getting airlifted out by a helicopter. Did you approach the outfit ahead of time and say, hey, this could happen, so you might get a call from me? Or how does the whole airlift thing come about?
Yeah, that was completely improvised over those few days that I was there waiting. So what had happened was where things literally froze up in a matter of like days. Basically, there was a big storm of 120-kilometer winds, like I said, like hurricane force winds. I was stranded on a peninsula for a week, 7 days. I couldn't go nowhere because the lake was massive and there was ocean-like waves. So after that, it just stayed cold. It was like every day after that it was cold, cold, cold. It never warmed up after. And then we had a big storm, and things froze over so quick that my pilot couldn't come in with his float plane anymore and get me. Like, he wasn't even expecting it. What happened was he ended up making calls to try to arrange a chopper to get me, and he had a contact with a fella in Quebec, and he arranged that guy come in on a little small, just a 2-seater chopper. He flew in. It was nearly 300 kilometers, like 290 odd kilometers, which was the closest we were to a community at that point in time. So we were well out there, well away from civilization, and he had around an hour and 30 minute chopper ride to come in and get us. So I had, like I said, the pilot of the float plane who was supplying me with resupplies was the one who arranged that for me, thankfully.
So are you able to lash your canoe to the helicopter?
No, I wasn't, you know. I suppose this is a bit of an emotional hotspot for me, Paul, is that I left my canoe was still up there. It's still in northern Quebec, still in the middle of nowhere. I couldn't come out on the helicopter. You know, my pilot's been trying to get in there this summer, but it's not necessarily up the road, you know. It would cost me to get him to fly in there and get the canoe. So he told me if he's in the area, he'd get it for me, but he hasn't been around there yet in that part of Quebec. So as of now, it still sits into the bush, tied to some trees in an upright vertical position. I'll be getting it back someday. A lot of emotional attachments. That was like my child for 3 months, you know. Mm-hmm. Even leaving it, you know, it was like leaving a baby in the woods.
What was your favorite part of the adventure?
Favorite part of the adventure was certainly coming up the red wine. As difficult and hazardous as it was, slippery rocks and getting washed down the river and lots of crazy things. My shins beat off me from just striking them off rocks as I went upriver. And Saku had a couple of times where he got washed out and stuff, you know. And so there was a lot of hardship coming up that river, but the rewards of every evening, as I said earlier, like knowing that there's no sign of anything, we have it all to ourselves, and we may have been the first person to be in this particular campsite or this particular campsite that's the feeling I like about these trips. And I hooked some nice fish on that river, and so that was certainly the most memorable spot, the most exciting section. Other than that, I mean, on Smallwood, I was catching fish. I was catching lake trout, 7-8 pounds, and I caught a speckled brook trout that was like 5 pounds. And these are, you know, as someone who really enjoys fishing, I mean, that was like a dream come true, because you don't get that kind of fishing every day here in Newfoundland unless you're going far out there, right? So, you know, some of those experiences were certainly memorable and exciting for me.
What was your biggest lesson that you learned, or the biggest takeaway from this adventure?
I'm always learning lessons, personal lessons of just realizing how much I can handle, how much we can all handle. We don't physically and mentally, we're not always in the position to really test ourselves. Like we're always in a lot of cerebral situations where we're testing ourselves mentally with work and things to be done and emails and everything else. But the physical stuff and even mental situations become more demanding on these trips. And, I think we can all handle more than we think. And I come back and I feel like I'm just further hardened for whatever life, is going to throw at me now based on the situations I've been through. And a lot of these situations, a lot of skills are very transferable in the real life and the real job situations, hard work and patience and planning and problem solving, in the situations I was in. So, that's always a big takeaway for me, and further preparing myself for the battle of life. And I think anyone can benefit from a trip outdoors. It doesn't have to be 80 odd days or 68 days. It could be 3 or 4 days, and just plan a challenging trip, something that makes you anxious, that maybe the night before, that you have some unanswered questions in your head because you don't know how things are going to turn out. You can get those feelings from a smaller trip if you make it a little bit challenging for yourself. Again, it doesn't have to be long. So that's what I get from it, but I get lots, I realized that how vast and crazy and wild Labrador really was, and certainly how it needs to be protected too, because there's not many areas left in the world like that still, and those that are we can look at the what's happening now down is the Amazon, isn't it? And the forest fires that they're you've heard about that,
right?
And what are they burning it off for? Is it for agriculture?
I don't know the details. I just heard there was fires.
I'm not 100% sure. I could be wrong, but I think they were burning it off for a reason. It might be for agriculture or something. I'm not sure. Bottom line, moral of the story is that, a place like Labrador, there has been some hydro development up there, and that can't be changed. That's enough. And there's been some mining up there, but some of it has to be left protected. You know what I mean? That's Canada. Not only Newfoundland and Labrador, but that's Canada. That's like one of the greatest things we have going for us is our outdoors and our wilderness. And it's the same thing with, Northwest Territories and northern BC and northern Ontario. These places with all this wilderness, people have to know it's there and people have to appreciate it. And then it'll be further protected and respected. And I think if I can get out there and see these places and come back and write about it and create a documentary series to show people, I think there's a further chance or a greater chance that it'll be looked after. And I think it needs to be, because it's a gem, and these places are they're like reservoirs for the human spirit to get out and explore, and of course all the wildlife that's up there. Yeah, certainly that we can handle more, and these places need to be protected. Certainly are two big things that I took away from that expedition.
Do you mind if I read another quote I pulled off your blog?
Go right ahead, Paul.
It says, "To me, nothing in life compares to these strong experiences in remote nature. As I often say, it's indescribable to those uninitiated, but no mystery to the ones who have seen the unknown with their own eyes. Of course, 83 days is certainly not needed, but at least a minimum of a week or two. A demanding self-propelled trip off the beaten track can strengthen everyday skills and give a certain appreciation/respect for the natural world and life as we have it. That I don't believe can be found anywhere else." Yeah, I love that quote again. Kind of sums up what you just said.
Yeah, there was long days on the trip. I was paddling, 35 kilometers a day after day. That happened, at times. And a lot of times I sit down and think and appreciate, what we do have at home, and how easy it is to come home and go into the kitchen and, put a slice of toast in the toaster and hit the Keurig and go sit on the couch in your house that is warmed by the heater, and lie in your bed, and we have it good. And I think sometimes a lot of us take it for granted. Even water, how easy it is to get water, good, fresh, clean water. In Newfoundland, a lot of places you can drink it right from the tap. Whereas on a trip, I got to go down and bail it out of the pond, and stuff like that. So I can go on and on here, but certainly makes you appreciate life to go out and have a good hard trip and roughen yourself up a bit and come back, and you'll be all the better for it.
Well, let's talk about the YouTube channel. In fact, I found you through, I think, Explorer's Web or something. So I was going through your website. Until the other day, I didn't know you really had much of a YouTube channel. I went there and I saw, oh my gosh, 20,000 subscribers. Some of your videos have over 50,000 views. You've got quite a little thing going on there. On the Newfoundland adventure, you have a series of videos already out there?
Yeah, I have a 10-part series. It's just called 68 Grueling Days in the Wilderness, Man and Dog. It's actually called Man and Dog Through the Newfoundland Wilderness, and which is also the name of the book I wrote on the trip, which we can talk about in a minute. But I didn't call it that on the YouTube title because, it's all about SEO and search optimization. And I just thought, having something catchy to the eye. So I used that 68-day kind of grueling wilderness thing. And yeah, but that's what it is if you want to find it, if you're interested in it, if anyone's interested in going and watching it. 10-part series. It's about 10 hours. Each one's roughly an hour. I think the first one's 30 minutes. The rest are around 15 minutes. The series has gotten around 400,000 views. So,
what's been the response? What's in the comments? What are people saying about it?
Oh, people have absolutely loved it. On some of the videos, I have like 600 or 700 comments. People have been saying it's unique. They haven't seen any content like that on YouTube. Of course, having Saku there, people like seeing dogs, and they love the wilderness of Newfoundland. They love the fishing that I get into, and nothing against anyone else, but I think I get a lot of comments too on people appreciating that it's about the adventure and what goes on, and less about what gear I have with me and me doing a gear review every day. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So people kind of enjoy that, where it's just more about the adventure, and I think they can tell too that I had nothing planned out when I left on that trip. I knew I was going to film this and try to film that, but I had no real script. So I think they can tell what happened, which is I just filmed it as I went, and I didn't know what was going to happen as much as they didn't know, as they watched it. So it's got some good reviews, and people have enjoyed it, and I'm going to do the same thing with the Labrador Trip. I'm actually just starting it now, and I may try to shorten this series up, maybe make it a half a dozen episodes, tighten it up a little bit, and start releasing that in early November is the plan.
The book, what is the title of the book?
So the book is called the same. Like if you go in and click on the series on YouTube, once you watch the intro, it'll say Man and Dog Through the Newfoundland Wilderness. The book is the same title, Man and Dog Through the Newfoundland Wilderness.
And was that self-published?
No, I wrote it myself, but it's published by a publishing company here in Newfoundland called Flanker Press. And they've published hundreds and hundreds of books that have been bestsellers and won awards. And yeah, I approached them, and through the help of a family it wasn't a family contact, but a friend of a friend, and she kind of connected me, and yeah, so they've published that book, which is basically my memoir of the trip, and a lot of things that weren't documented in the series, because of course it's hard to put everything on camera where I have battery restraints and everything else. So I wanted to give a deeper look into the story, and there in the book I talk more about the gear and the techniques I use. So that's a way to see a different side of the story and see my thoughts and how I thought Saku felt and everything else, and a lot of history on the province and the Aboriginal groups, and about the landscape of Newfoundland, and about the geography and our culture. So I've built a lot into it, and I hope it's a book that sticks around for years to come, and I'm looking to get it into the schools as a part of the curriculum, hopefully in the future, because it could certainly fit that bill. So that's exciting. So that's coming out October 5th, roughly. And not only do I have a book, but using my story and my references, the lady who introduced me to the publishing group wrote a children's book on our trip from Saku's point of view. And I just made a post on my social media about that yesterday, and that book is called Saku's Great Newfoundland Adventure. and that's a children's book, aimed at the ages 5 to 11, I think. It has a lot of good stuff about outdoors and a lot of good camping tips for younger kids and things to inspire them to get outdoors. And it's basically, it's our story told from Saku's point of view, and got some great illustrations. And so I'm excited about both of those. And his is coming out next month, September 10th. So exciting times.
Very cool. Where can people buy those books at?
So you're going to be able to buy the books like at Indigo, Kohl's, Chapters, which are book retailers. Is Chapters in the States as well? Yes.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, anyways, these are book retailers here in Newfoundland, in Canada. But you'll also be able to buy signed copies from me. I'll also be selling them. And that way I can make a little extra money if I buy them and sell them myself. The publisher still gets their funds, but I get a little more from buying and selling them that way. So what I'm gonna do is I'll be setting up a shop and I'll be selling them. I'll make posts on my Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and YouTube, but people can buy them that way from me as well, and I'll sign them and send them out, both mine and Saku's books.
Are you going to make like an ebook available?
There will be ebooks as well. The publisher will be looking after that, and I guess eventually there'll be some sort of Audible version too.
Well, Justin, I know we've talked about all these things that you got coming up, but any other things coming up for you on the horizon? You got any other adventures on tap?
There's always adventures, Paul. Nothing of great magnitude in the near future, but later on next year, I have a couple ideas that I'm looking at putting in action, and right now I'm just going to keep it at that. And I'm excited for the books and that Labrador series I'm putting on YouTube, and getting out and signing some books and meeting some people and presenting and doing some live readings and stuff like that. So that's basically what's going to consume a lot of my fall. And but there'll be a couple of small fishing trips and some hunting trips for a few days here and there. I got to keep getting out. You know what I mean? If I go too long, I get cranky.
Are you organizing your own book tour, or is the publisher helping you organize a tour?
They have some stuff. They got a pretty good marketing team, so they organize some stuff themselves. But separately, yes, I'm looking at probably a month or so after the book is out, maybe end of November, early December, and into the new year to get out on at least a couple tours around the province and maybe even outside the province into Atlantic Canada and other parts of Canada. To get out and just go to some centers and some breweries and some community centers and stuff like that. And I'd also like to get into the schools as well, which I have done in the past, talking about my trips. But now I'd like to get in with the books and do some readings for them as well.
Well, how can people find you online if they want to learn more?
Yeah, but on Instagram, I think it's at NL Explorer 88. That's on Instagram. You can look up Justin Barbour. I guess it'll come up too. And then on Twitter, you can find me. Same thing there. And I'm on Facebook. Facebook's a little different. I'm not under my name. I'm under the name The Newfoundland Explorer. And that's at NL Explorer 88. And of course, you can follow me on the YouTube channel as well, just Justin Barbour. Even LinkedIn, if you're on that. So lots of ways to find me online. And of course, the website that you already mentioned.
Okay, Justin Barbour, I want to say thank you to you for taking the time to share your story with us. Congratulations once more on your engagement. Good luck in the wedding, whenever that is, and continued success on all your adventures.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate you having me on, and best of luck with the podcast, too. It looks like you're doing great with it. Keep on plugging away.
Thank you very much. Thanks again for listening. You can find this episode online at thepursuitzone.com/TPZ182. That's TPZ182. The best way to support the podcast is to subscribe and share this episode with your friends. You'll be able to find subscription links at thepursuitzone.com. If you're listening on YouTube, be sure to give this a big thumbs up. You can follow and like on Facebook and Twitter at The Pursuit Zone. If you want to send me some feedback, you can write me at paul@thepursuitzone.com. You can also leave a voice message at speakpipe.com/thepursuitzone. This episode was recorded on August 29th, 2019. For the show notes and more great adventure travel podcasts, visit thepursuitzone.com.